Very good evening to you all and a very warm welcome to another NHRD and important webinar under the series Between the Lines. We are going to talk today about how to pivot your career in the midst of change. This is Sheetal Bansode, the Chapter Coordinator for National HRD Network Pune, and I am your host. I welcome you all on behalf of the entire NHRD in Pune team. That is Mr. Anand Khote, our President, Mr. Aman Rajaballi, our Vice President, Dr. Neeraj Mankad, our Treasurer, Mr. Salil Malhotra, our Events Lead, and Mr. Darpan Singh, who is our HR Evangelist. Our panelists will be happy to listen to your thoughts and answer your questions, so please share them with us at any time during the webinar using the question panel. So without wasting much time now, I invite Dr. Neeraj Mankad to take the session forward, please.
Thank you, Sheetal. A very warm good evening, and I say warm because that's how the temperature in Pune is making us all feel. And it's great today to have this session, especially looking at careers. And thanks to Ved and Eklavya and the entire Upuhan team on behalf of the entire NHRDN committee. It's great to be associated with both Upuhan and Advait and Eklavya. And am I audible?
Yeah. Yes, Neeraj, you are.
Sorry, I somehow lost track of what's happening. So as I was saying, it is great. We've been having these series of webinars going on for quite some time, and it's always been an edge of the seat discussion that we've seen, and I'm sure that this one is going to be no different with the great panel that Advait manages to get each time. I'm sure all of you are participating and all of us enjoying this in the background would have. Thanks to the three great panelists who are here, Dr. Sujaya, Dr. Kaustubh, and Reza. It's great to have you here and virtually be able to meet you even though from a distance. Great once again. Let me hand this over now to Eklavya. We've got Anand Khote, our president, here as well. Perhaps he will be talking to us once. Yeah, there you are, Anand. Would you like to add something? Or?
No, let's get started. We are slightly delayed, so towards the end, I'll share my perspectives. Thank you. All the best to you.
So have a great discussion, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Anand. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to our panelists as well, and all the attendees who have taken time and effort to be online here. My name is Advait Kurlekar. My colleague here is Eklavya Malhotra. Both of us, among others, represent a consulting company based in Pune called Upuhan Management Consultants. And in fact, it was exactly 3 years ago, October of 2017, when we started this initiative called Between the Lines. What started off as a small initiative, thankfully has, thanks to our partnership with the National HRD Network, has grown big. And however odd it may sound, thanks to COVID, we have been forced to move online, and therefore, it has grown in terms of numbers, in terms of participants as well. So let me quick introduction in terms of what the format is and what I've been doing last 3 years. So this is Between the Lines session number 45 now. We have launched this program every month. Each month we pick up a management book, and Eklavya, my colleague, has been kind enough to read and reread these books and present a summary of that each book to us, which he'll do now very shortly in his own unique, witty, humorous, and obviously very knowledgeable way. Every book has insights, every book has learnings, and depending on what that topic is, we have been fortunate to get a great panelist every month, including this month. And then I come back again and moderate a panel discussion on the topic and not necessarily on the book. So as always, it happens, most of the panelists reach out to me saying that, hey, I have not read the book. How do I get on the panel? And I said, no, don't worry. No question will be on the book. It is on the topic. all our panelists are there because of their past experience, and personal experience and expertise in that particular topic, and therefore you need not read the book. So again, Sujaya and Reza and Kaustubh, if he's logged in again, I promise you there'll be no question on the book. But so doesn't matter. So that's the kind of format. So next 25-30 minutes, Ekla will take us to the book, and then I'll come back, formally introduce our panelists, and we'll start the panel discussion. Feel free to put in your questions in the chat box. Eklavya or somebody, Sheetal or somebody would sort of connect with us in terms of what those questions are, and I can take some questions in between and definitely towards the end of the session as well. So over to Eklavya.
Thanks, Advait. I hope my screen is visible to everybody.
Yes.
All right. So the book that we've selected for this month is as close to the theme as it can possibly get. And its author, Jenny Blake, is quite the leading authority when it comes to career pivots. Jenny started her own career with 2 years at a technology startup in Silicon Valley, which was founded by her college professor. And she followed that up with a very illustrious 5-6 year stint at Google in training and career development, where she helped co-create the global career guru drop-in coaching program. It's quite a renowned coaching program, and Google was one of the first guys to actually think of creating a drop-in coaching program, which later on was replicated across the tech industry and others. So after 5.5 years at Google, Jenny left her job in 2011 to launch her first book, Life After College, and has since been running her own consulting business in New York. And in 2016, after having spent a few years experimenting and figuring out what it meant to run her own business and create a new career, she wrote her second book, Pivot, which actually took the world by storm when it released. The book has won several awards and it has propelled her to fame. Now, in addition to hosting the supremely popular Pivot podcast, she also helps clients like Google, Microsoft, Chanel, among others, to incorporate the Pivot method into their own career coaching programs. So we really didn't have to rack our brains too hard when it came to choosing a book that will set the context for our subsequent discussions on how to pivot your career path. We keep hearing this, especially in the current environment, that change is the only constant. And no matter how many times we are told to embrace change, truth be told, most of us are awfully bad at reconciling with change. It doesn't really get any better when it comes to career change also. Given the rapid pace of innovation, automation, globalization, obsolescence, we are all facing career changes much more frequently than the previous generations. So careers are not at all linear nowadays. They are no longer predictable ladders. They are more like fluid trajectories, which are shaping in some form or the other as we move along. And no matter what our age might be, life stage, bank balance, or seniority within the organization, we are all being asked to navigate career changes much more often than earlier. The question, what's next for me, is a constant nagging thought that plagues most people, irrespective of where they might be on the career path. And the same question has haunted Jenny Blake since she started her professional journey. And fortunately for us, her journey has culminated into this book that provides a very clear set of actionable insights on how to plan our next career moves. In fact, I fear that Advait perhaps chose this book as a very subtle hint to me that I've spent more than 11 years working alongside him now, and now he wants me to pivot in any direction away from him. Maybe that's why he's insisted on sitting 20 feet away from me today, rather than a very civil 6 feet away. Anyway, back to Jenny. So now most of you would wonder why somebody who worked at Google, which is pretty much the Disneyland of the corporate world, would get so fidgety and start thinking about what the avenues she can pursue. It almost seems unreasonable, right, that somebody in Google would want to move out. In fact, on account of everyone constantly reminding her that she was living the dream, she actually started internalizing the guilt that she felt about wanting to seek more than what Google could offer her. To give you an example of this tendency to judge others without really having no idea of what they're going through. One of the early reviews of this book said that it is highly ironic that a career development manager at Google's much envied Career Guru program hit a career plateau and decided, or rather needed, to take a sabbatical. Now, this is almost as ludicrous as questioning a doctor's credentials when she falls sick. Far from being ironic, it's actually very important that we constantly think about, and we actively consider what's next for us, because nobody else is going to be as invested in our career development as we ourselves are. And navigating this accelerated pace of change and this somewhat transitional career state, learning to embrace it instead of resisting it, can actually become an edge and advantage for you. So now the word pivot can often be misleading. Firstly, because it is used so commonly nowadays in context of business model pivots that one tends to associate it very narrowly only with business and not with individual career aspirations. Secondly, it does not have to imply a very drastic career change, or it does not imply changing your career constantly or completely. That's not it at all. In fact, pivot is inherently, it's more like a segue from one related thing to the next, and you can even pivot within your role. There's nothing wrong with you if you hit a pivot point or a plateau, which you can make out in this graphical representation, especially if you're good at a job. So if you're good at your job, you are more likely to hit this pivot point earlier than others. Because it's actually a product of your success, and in some ways it is a testimony to your prowess in the current role. It means that you're actively seeking more content in your role and you're looking to grow further. So this book is an attempt to answer two questions. Firstly, how can people be as agile as startups? And secondly, how do we get better at asking and answering this question, what's next? So drawing from her own experience and those of other successful pivoters, Jenny has created a 4-stage process that teaches us how to pivot seamlessly and continually. These 4 steps are: double down on your strengths, interests, and experiences, find new opportunities and identify skills to develop, run small experiments to determine your next steps, and finally, take smart risks to launch with confidence in a new direction or develop within your current role. So this is the 4-stage process which she has come out with, that is widely being used for career pivots and also for business pivots nowadays. So one of the things that she has actually created, and she urges all the readers to use it before you get into the nitty-gritties of the framework, is the riskometer, which is basically something that tells you what your risk appetite or your risk threshold is, or what it should be. So it's pretty self-explanatory. So if you look at it, the blue dot with the circle around it, that's the pivoting point. So you can either stagnate and go right down over a period of time, or you can be in your comfort zone, which means you're just sort of doing a very gradual, small set of changes within your current role or within your current capabilities or skill sets, and you're content with that. So there's nothing tectonic which is happening. There are no big ticket items that you're considering in terms of your pivot. Or you can sort of take a lot on your plate and you can go vertically up, but that might land you into the panic zone because you're attempting to actually sort of bite more than you can chew. So that's the panic zone. The ideal rate for change and your next steps is the stretch zone, where you feel challenged, you feel excited, and you're also focused with a very healthy dose of adrenaline, which is propelling you forward as you move into this pivoting phase. So that's the riskometer, which tells you exactly in terms of how you ought to assess your own risk appetite. And the other thing which she suggests is that you should think back or look back on a recent time or not so recent time, depending on when you last made a pivot in your own career. So she suggests that you should think back on a previous pivot point when you realize that you've hit this proverbial career plateau and you needed to make a change. what strengths did you draw upon that time to make this transition? And you think of two pivots, one that you've made internally within your current company or business or role, and the second is about the pivot that got you there. So just to illustrate it and explain it further, let's take Jenny's own example. So like I mentioned earlier, that she was working out of college at a startup, which was founded by her professor. She was the first employee over there. And for many months, she was also the only employee working with him. So one of the things that she was handling and that she was really good at was the Google AdWords account for the startup. She pivoted from working at a startup where she was managing their Google AdWords accounts to a role at Google on the AdWords product training team. So that was the first pivot that she made. And 2 years into the role at Google, she realized that she actually loved working with people, but she really felt stagnant or stifled by the content of these product trainings. It did not really give her much scope to go further than AdWords product training. So this sparked her pivot from product training to the career development team at Google, which had just about started off at that point of time. So the purpose of this reverse engineering or reflection is basically to draw inspiration on what worked at that time and what didn't work last time around. So this kind of sets your base when you launch into the first phase of pivot. The first stage, like we saw earlier, is plan. So this is the foundation stage. And what she recommends is that you need to start this journey essentially by investing in what comes naturally to you. Now, in many years of career coaching, one thing that Jenny realized is that the biggest mistake that most people make when they're thinking of making a career pivot is that they focus way too much on what they don't want, on what they don't know, and what they don't even have yet. So that's one of the cardinal mistakes that most people seem to be committing. And she says that rather than doing something absolutely new, on for which you have no prior experience, why don't you invest first and foremost into things that come naturally to you, things that spark your interest, your curiosity, areas that energize you, and also certain directional guidelines which govern your own life, be it at work or otherwise. So what does she mean by that? The first thing is a values mind map. She highly recommends creating similar kind of values mind map, where you start with defining that, okay, what do you stand for essentially in life? What exactly do you stand for? What defines you as a person, as an individual? What are your core values, the way in which we define values for our organizations, for our teams? Similarly, do this exercise for yourself and go for quantity, not for quality. Very often, when we do a kind of a values mind map, one of the stumbling blocks is that we want to go for things that sound really good, that look really good, rather than going for as many exhaustive options of things that perhaps influence you, the things that guide you, things that impact you in some little way or in some major way. And we tend to look at only the big ticket items. We ignore everything else as noise or peripheral values, but that should not be the case. You need to look at every single thing. Try and make a mind map until you can fill out a page or a PowerPoint slide or what have you. But try and come up with as many areas which you feel define in some way or the other who you are as a person first and foremost, because that is very important. Your pivot or any career move that you make, in some form or the other, it has to be aligned to what is very, very intrinsic within you. And those are your own values. The next is in terms of identifying a few key themes which govern your life, which reappear, which recur in terms of your decision making. Because what happens is very often, and I'm sure a lot of us would have gone through this kind of a dilemma, that there are areas which we are very competent in, and there are areas which we sort of really go after, which really drive us, which we really want to get engaged in, involved in, and these two may not always be overlapping to the extent that we would wish them to be. So, you could be working in a certain role within your organization. We've come across this so many times in our consulting engagement. Somebody who's working in sales is actually driven because the real strength of that person actually lies in people management the real strength lies in bringing people from diverse backgrounds together. And when they make that career shift, they realize that they're actually feeling much more fulfilled later on after taking that kind of drastic step, some might say. And the third thing is that you need to also think back in terms of the daily mundane activities. Because while we are talking about career pivot and while you might be hoping that it takes you on a new trajectory altogether, at the end of the day, whether it is a pivot or your existing role that you're continuing in, you are going to be faced with the prospect of carrying out
There is
projects,
some static coming
activities.
from your side.
I think somebody, yeah, I think there's somebody's
There are two
mic is
instruments
not on mute. If I can
on.
request all the other panelists to mute themselves, please. Okay, that's better. So these are three categories in which Jenny suggests that you should look back at least for a 1 month period. So think back on the last 30 days, all the projects or activities that you were involved in while at work, and try and distinguish these activities or categorize them into these broad buckets. So which were the activities that the minute you started doing that or the minute it came up on your calendar, it just kind of sapped the energy out from you? Which were the things that you just needed to get it done because the boss was breathing down your neck or because you really couldn't escape it anymore? So you had to get it out of your, things to do list. And what were those activities finally, which sort of made you forget, that there is some kind of timeline, that there is, that there are other pressing activities also? Which were those areas of those few tasks that you were doing that really energized you and kept you sort of supremely engaged, extremely driven? And those are the areas which you can then perhaps identify and see whether they match with your areas of competence and strength. And also, are they in line with your core values? Is that something which really motivates you, which you can consider doing over a longer period? And that hopefully gives you enough fodder to get into your stage 2, which is scan. So building upon whatever insights you've drawn from looking at your own self, taking a sort of deep, hard look at the person who greets you in the mirror, you need to scan for 3 things primarily. The first is people, the second is skills, and the third is projects. So scanning is the way to bridge the gap between that final destination, which we see over here on the slide, and the pivot point where you currently are. So you've taken a sort of a look at your strengths, and now you're saying that, okay, in order to develop further, who are the kind of people that I need to interact with? Which are the people that I need to be speaking more to? Which are the people that I need to go for guidance, for some kind of coaching, or just in terms of being a fly on the wall and observing their mannerisms, the kind of choices they make, the decisions that they take, and the process that goes behind all of that? Are there any new skills that I need to develop? And in order to develop these skills, are there any existing projects that are perhaps available or that are perhaps relevant to gather these skills? Do I have those projects internally, or do I need to seek some external opportunities as well? So that is essentially the second stage of scanning. And over here, what she talks about, again, a lot of this is also very closely linked to psychology. So what she's talking about is that, again, if you look at when you're scanning, you can go 2 paths. Typically, people would like to take upon a very challenging task, but maybe you're not cut out for it yet. Maybe you don't have the requisite skills in place yet. Perhaps you are a work in progress. So if you do that, then you end up in that anxiety or the worry zone. Whereas sometimes you might just take very little things which will make you feel happy about yourself, but they may not be enough to really test your boundaries because you're already skillful enough and you're really not taking upon something which is testing whether these skills are really going to hold true come tomorrow, come day after, or 1 year down the line. So that is the zone where you're very relaxed, you're very controlled. What you need to do is somehow get into that flow state, what psychologists call flow. There's a book also written by an author. Unfortunately, his last name I cannot pronounce. He's from somewhere in East Europe, but it's a very popular book. And while going through this, for me, what immediately came to mind was Marie Kondo and her philosophy of decluttering. It's very similar to what you see over here. So that's the kind of, the intersection point is where you need to play at. But obviously, that's easier said than done. And that brings us to stage 3, which is pilot. So essentially, pilot, as we all are familiar with, it's about taking upon something one small little bit at a time. And the whole thing is that how do we create, what we've attempted to show as snowfalls over here, snowflakes. So little snowflakes which will help create a giant snowball, and then hopefully there'll be some momentum which will carry you forth to your final destination, which is the kind of that pivot journey which you want to sort of wanted to culminate into. So how do you essentially take all these new skills or new projects that you worked on? How do you really test it out? So can you take upon some additional role? Can you actually go back to somebody within the organization and see that, okay, I'm looking at devoting some extra time to develop this ability or to work on this additional project? And all of this really helps you in terms of basically determining whether this path is even meant for you, or do you need to again sort of go back to the drawing board, go back to the first stage and see whether the foundation itself was incorrectly asserted. So over here in pilot, what we are essentially looking at getting into, or rather what we are trying to determine, are what she calls the 3 E's. So it's basically enjoyment, because again, when you're doing this pilot test, the whole idea is that you're doing it today, you're doing it for a week, you're doing it for 2 weeks. Is it going to keep you sort of in the game, even if you do it 6 months down the line? Or is it something which is very temporary? It's like, Advait and I were just discussing before the session. Both of us have changed our phones in this week, and we were talking about how excited we were until the phones actually got delivered to us. And when the phones actually got delivered to us, we really couldn't care two hoots about opening up the box or unpacking it. We were like, yeah, it's okay, it's a new phone. We get it. But the anticipation was so joyful. So do you have that enjoyment every day? You'll come to know that through the pilot. Do you possess the necessary expertise, or are you really barking up the wrong tree? And most importantly, whatever that you're trying to do in terms of this pilot, is it really scalable? So again, this gives you an idea why the framework is being used so successfully, even for business model pivots nowadays, not just for career pivots. So what you need to do is basically you identify, you do your brainstorming, and you narrow it down to basically the top 3 pilots. And it's all about going for maximum bang for your buck. So that's the first one. The second is, what can you do really fast? Because again, sometimes you just need to test it and get it over with to understand that is it really worth investing additional efforts also. And the third is something which is really going to challenge you, but at the same time it's also going to excite you to the fullest extent possible. And it's very uncertain, it's very ambiguous. It could be something which can lead to some kind of green shoots, but at this stage it just seems like something that you're doing to indulge yourself. So these are the kind of 3 pilots that she recommends you should work on during this stage. And mind you, all this is very cyclical in nature. All of this she recommends doing for a period of at least 6 to 12 months before you finally make that pivot. Because that brings us to stage 4, which is non-cyclical. Stages 1, 2, and 3 are cyclical in nature. You can keep running back and forth between those 3 phases. But when it comes launch time, at that point of time, you are taking a step forward and you're ready to risk the failure. So there is not, in a way, there is no coming back from this stage. So over here, what we have, for those of us who are familiar with the business model canvas, which is being used a lot, especially in context of lean organizations nowadays, she has come up with her own pivot planner, which is similar to the business model canvas, but again, yeah, it's really helpful. If you try spending some time penning down your thoughts over here, you'll realize that it really does help. This whole talk about pivot and all this, career moves, sometimes one can take it really lightly. I know that we are all familiar with statistics that the average millennial changes jobs every 3.5 or 4 years. Before they turn 30, they're already onto their 4th job. So, all these things said and done, at the end of the day, if you're putting down your thoughts in a very structured manner to plan your career move, chances are that you'll get it right more often than not. So this is the kind of a planner that she has come up with. I won't really get into the details of it right now. But what I really wanted to at the point before we conclude is that while we've spoken about the 4 stages, One interesting thing, and especially relevant for today's forum, because we have a lot of HR practitioners, we have a huge number of coaches who have joined us today, leadership coaches, career coaches. You can also use this framework for carrying out meaningful career conversations. Because the thing is that all of this, if it is left to an individual to do their own pivoting, yeah, you can do it, but it's just going to take you a long time. Not everybody has the necessary wherewithal, whether it is in terms of resources, capabilities, or sometimes even intellect. That is where a coach is so important. That is where most of the people who have joined us for today's session, and definitely all the three panelists, will have so much value to add. Because if you look at this method, she's talking about that when you're having a career conversation with somebody who's looking to pivot or who might even be looking to exit the organization, then you can have a coaching conversation also around these lines, where you are spending 50% of the time in terms of laying down the framework, the foundation part, where you're trying to understand what this person is all about. 20% is in terms of giving that person an idea in terms of what are the viable opportunities that are available to that person. Then another 20% of the conversation can be focused in terms of narrowing down some ideas that, okay, let's just look at what is perhaps, while everything might be desirable, not everything is going to be viable. And also what is something that is going to fulfill this desire of yours that is perhaps wanting you to leave the organization or actively seeking a role enhancement or a lateral shift. And finally, the remaining 10% is in terms of that, what are the key takeaways from this conversation that that both people are experiencing, and is there any actionable insight that is coming out, and if so, can you put some timeline to it? So essentially what she's saying is that in a career conversation, can you keep on asking these two questions repeatedly? What else, and what's important to you about that? Extremely important. And when I was doing this, I realized that we are actually quite fortunate that we have Dr. Sujaya with us today, because she is pretty much an international expert when it comes to appreciative inquiry. And that is something which I think really fits in nicely with what Jenny Blake is also trying to suggest through this kind of a framework for career conversation. I'm sure Advait would probably ask Sujaya to share her views on that. I'm sure it will be very meaningful for all of us. And if you look at one of the things, 70-20-10, we are all familiar with that, for the learning framework. So Jenny Blake has now adapted the 70-20-10, and she's saying you can also use this as HR, as coaches. We can also use this in terms of having these coaching conversations. 70% is deep listening, where you're actively listening. 20% is asking simple yet hopefully some kind of thought-provoking questions. And 10% is in terms of summarizing and recapping for the benefit of your coachee, what exactly you're talking about and what you're learning on the way. So that's the basic summary of the book. If you like the summary, I would urge you to pick up a copy of the book, read it. It's always helpful to understand things, especially from someone else's perspective who's gone through pivoting multiple times. And yeah, just try and think about this one or two questions, for the remainder of the day, and then this would be 1.5 hours well spent. What is that one small step which you can take Monday morning? And what is the next step, according to you, which would actually make the biggest impact? So that's it from my side. I'm Eklavya Malhotra, and thank you for listening in. Over to Advait for the main feature of today's session, panel discussion.
Thanks, Eklavya, as always, for the wonderful summary of otherwise easy to understand but difficult initially to sort of understand that book. But once you make this presentation, it's easy to understand. Thanks for not taking this book too seriously and pivoting out of Upwork. Yes, I got the cue from you in terms of one of the questions I want to ask Sujaya, appreciative inquiry. So it gives me great pleasure and honor to formally introduce our panelists to you today, starting with Sujaya, or Dr. Sujaya Banerjee. Although the HR fraternity in India as well as outside, she doesn't need any great introduction because we know her. But yes, she has had a wonderful blue chip corporate career for nearly 2 decades, in organizations like British Gas, ADNOC, SR, Low Lintus. She now is the founder and CEO of her own boutique people consulting company called Capstone. She has also launched a couple of initiatives in the Asia Pacific region, the LNOD Roundtable and the Women's Leadership Forum. She's a TEDx speaker, she's an international speaker, she's of course an author, and she's one of the proponents of appreciative inquiry, which we'll talk about when we get to her session. So thanks, Sujaya, for sparing your time today, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you for the invitation.
Pleasure. Up next, hopefully Kaustubh, you're there. I don't think we can.
I can see you, but I don't think you can see. There's some issue here at my end. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah,
Yes,
we can hear you. So
Great.
I think between the two, I think we'd rather hear you, if not see you, rather than the other way around. So, our next panelist is Dr. Kaustubh Dhargalkar. He's and again, like Eklavya mentioned earlier as well, the panelists and in every month when we have this session, the panelists we invite and they're ready to come is because of the expertise and the experience they have in that particular topic. And Sujaya, of course, I'll come to that when we ask them questions. Kaustubh, of course, it has, again, like Sujaya, a corporate person, a serial entrepreneur, pivoted to yoga, and we'll talk about it in the questions, and author and a teacher, of course, and large number of students, I'm sure, have joined up today as well. He teaches in Wellinger, he teaches in ISB, he teaches in IIM Ahmedabad, in Narsi Monji, and many other business schools. So entrepreneur, academician, innovation evangelist, author, and that's the pivot that we have here. And of course, he has his doctorate in innovation and design thinking. So welcome, Kaustubh, and thanks for sparing your time for this panel discussion.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And last but not the least is my colleague and friend, ex-colleague and current friend, Reza Alawi, all the way from Dubai. Reza, thanks for joining on a Friday. I know it's a weekly off for you, and I can see you that you're in your studio, in your office. So thanks again. Reza is, what should I say, a career pivotist. Post his education, he started his career in consulting, where I met him many years ago, many moons ago, and we worked together for a couple of years and worked in different geographies on wonderful consulting assignments. He was part of Cedar Consulting at that point in time. Joined his family business, then he switched over from consulting to the other side of the table and joined one of our clients and worked as the head of strategy and business planning in Nissan Middle East. And then he pivoted again, no consulting, no corporate, and now he's pivoted as an entrepreneur, and he runs a chain of Pilates studios called Real Pilates in Dubai. And to the best of my understanding, he's doing extremely well. So thanks, Reza, for joining in all the way from Dubai, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me. It's a
so pleasure. So let me start with you, Sujaya, because we talked about some part of what you've done, and when we talk of pivoting, you've spent a good number of years in group corporate. You've been heading HR functions. You've worked with consultants, and now you sort of switched sides and pivoted to the other side of the table, and you're managing your own consulting and coaching kind of business. So what was that pivot? What was that trigger that sort of made you switch from corporate to consulting and coaching? Let me start with that first.
Okay, so I think I'm going to first of all thank you for this initiative that you created, between the lines, which uses the backdrop of a thought leadership, that has been expressed or demonstrated through a book, and then you have practitioners, the people who have practice experience, talk around that theme. And I must compliment Eklavya for doing a great job with being able to present that book so well. So just for Eklavya, the name of the author you were looking for Flow, his name's pronounced as Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. So you said it was a very complicated name, so I just thought I'd kind of let you know. I kind of took special effort to learn it because it doesn't read like the way it's written. And I think that I'm going to come over to Advait's question, because we've known Advait while I was working for the SR group, and I must say here that we never got down to ever talking about my career with Advait. So I'm really glad that we have a platform now to be able to talk about some of these personal decisions that we make as we go along and the professional ones. So I think to begin with, the reason why I liked what Jenny Blake puts out is, first of all, she's asking people to take charge of their own careers. And I think this is something that we've been trying to drive home for a very, very long time. There's something naive even about the best of professionals who come from premier schools, where they believe that organizations are going to plan and organize their careers. And so they're constantly waiting for somebody else to tell them what it is that they're good at, for somebody else to tell them what it is that they should do next. And while that naivety is all right when you're a much younger professional, it's completely embarrassing to not have that clarity yourself as you're much older as a professional. So I must say that I've, through my career in the corporate world, that's been over 3 decades, seen both young people, mid-level people, and senior people behave almost in a similar manner, where there is some inexplicable expectation that the organization that has employed you is going to manage your career. So I'm glad that Jenny put this book out, and I think there have been a couple of other authors as well who reiterated the fact that your career is your business. So you've got to be able to have the reins of that career in your hands. When corporates hire you, they hire you for a role that fits in their distribution of work within organizations, where they believe you have the skill sets or the background or the experience to be able to deliver on that role. And it's meaningful for them to have you in that role. So it's important for you to know that it's not their job to be able to figure, what else could you be good at? What is it that you're actually liking to do? What are you really passionate about? What is it that is unexpressed in your repertoire of experience or even in your repertoire of interest? Now, I must say there are career dialogues within organizations, and some of them are doing it and some not so well. I'm afraid even the high potential programs in most organizations have not really succeeded so greatly because, there aren't next roles to be able to give everyone. And then that's where your value proposition just kind of goes kaput, because you don't really have positions to give everyone who goes through a high potential program expecting a next role. So I'll come back to myself very quickly, because I know there are other speakers and you have more questions to ask. So I must say, first of all, my decision to take on the Chief Talent Officer role at SR was a considered one, because I had already spent from the time I was 27 as HR head. So I had already been HR head for a very significant amount of time, I think about 14 years before I took on various organizations. And before I took on the role with SR, and my condition to come in was that I will not be HR head. So I didn't want to be HR head. I had done that role for long enough, and I wanted to come in a strategic role. I wanted to come in to be able to drive change within the organization. I was on the lookout for an Indian company that would be able to be a good playing ground, because my own career has been very skewed in favor of MNCs. And in my preparation to want to set up my own consulting firm, it was absolutely imperative to get my hands dirty with an Indian firm. And I wanted to join an organization that didn't have systems and processes and was looking for someone to be able to professionalize their culture. So I looked for an opportunity like this. I was delighted when I was presented with this opportunity. I must submit, the same employer had approached me a couple of years before when I was still working with British Gas. And I did not at that time think this was the befitting option to be able to make a move in terms of taking on a strategic role and not the #1 HR role. Because at that time they were much smaller and perhaps less relevant than when I made the move, because they were poised to be able to grow. They had huge funds that had come in already, which was in the news in terms of the Vodafone deal. I knew they were flush with funds. I knew they would be able to spend on the kind of interventions that we would actually be able to drive. I was aware that they they had not conceptualized a role like that. But they knew they needed someone who would help them drive change. So I must say that this was a considered decision. What made me move out? I took this role because I wanted to be a consultant. And because it was a conglomerate and they had 11 group companies, this role was like being an internal consultant already. So you would get your hands dirty in terms of being able to drive performance management for so many people, or drive talent management systems for so many people, drive technology platforms for so many people, drive leadership development for the entire group. I mean, it was the perfect breeding ground to be able to make the. Yeah.
So
I think,
I know I said I know I said I'm not going to ask any question on the book, but I'm going to pivot to that. And like Jenny says, it was an organic pivot for you. Whatever you're doing internally, now you're doing as part of as being an external consultant.
Yeah, and I think that the big takeaway from that, and I'm glad you asked this question. I didn't think you were going to ask about my own pivot, but I'm glad you did, because you know, I think that it takes some courage to not want the #1 role. It means sacrificing the power. It means that you have to align with a whole lot of other people to be able to get the job done and to learn how to do that. And I think that the humility that people talk about, which is you don't, when you have a job that is powerful and you make a transition as a consultant, you know, the loss of power that you experience, I'm glad I got trained to experience that already when I did this role earlier. So it was a very considered choice. And I think that perhaps people should take away from this the fact that you got to walk towards your own next goal. And your roles should add up to what it is that you want to do finally.
Yeah, like you said, career, that leash has to be in your own hands, and somebody else cannot control your career. You have to be in control of that. Great. Thanks for the background, Sujaya. Kaustubh, coming to you, you know, you yourself have again gone through your own different pivots, you know, from corporate to serial entrepreneur, and every sort of startup you had itself was a pivot. And then suddenly, you know, like Sujaya mentioned, I use the word organic pivot. You went into what I call an inorganic pivot. You know, you went to become a yoga teacher. What was again the thought process? Why from corporate to consultant? People understand. I can't say I was in corporate. I was always in consultant. But I also did my own organic pivot from being consulting, working with somebody, to starting on my own, but in the same business. What went in your mind from consultant to serial entrepreneur, and from serial entrepreneur to yoga teacher? And of course, we'll later on come to Reza, because he does yoga Pilates. So,
am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Unfortunately, we can't see you, but like I said, between seeing and hearing, we want to hear you.
My Mac refused to pivot to go to webinar. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
Trying for the last half an hour. Anyway, going back to where I started after doing my MBA, I got on my own. A lot of people kind of poo-pooed me at that time. Why are you kicking up a campus job with Bancam and Reliance Petrochemicals? Why are you getting into this? But anyway, all that is fine. So there was some kind of a feeling that I would always want to be on my own. So we started off very small with a small engineering unit, one of the few BTechs in my class who actually went into engineering. Most of them are either into Wall Street or somewhere in some multinationals. So for 3-4 years, quite a struggle. That company we built up quite well. One became 2, 3. I had about 8 different ventures, out of which 3 succeeded, 5 kind of failed spectacularly. So those were real learning points there. And whatever I talk right now doesn't come from those 3 successes, but it comes more from those 5 failures. So and then the companies grew.
You learn more from your failures than your successes, as they say.
Yeah, I mean that's I personally very strongly believe in that. And then from 1990 we started, and by 2001, 2002 we had set up a very good portfolio of products. We got into assembly line automation. We got into complete end-to-end automation of manufacturing lines. Customers included Motors and Eicher and those kinds of people. But somewhere around 2001, 2002, I think we grew to a scale where I kind of started feeling that the creator in me, who was actually designing machines and equipments, somewhere was taking the back seat. And I was kind of becoming more of an administrator, kind of an individual. From about 5 individuals, we had grown to about 77 in that 11 years. But somewhere, that feeling used to be there that now I'm not creating something. I'm, firefighting, managing these people, managing payments, cash flows, a whole lot of things. And I was going away from that drawing board, which I used to be very comfortable with, designing stuff.
So you were more comfortable being a technocrat rather than a businessman?
Yeah, whatever you call it, technocrat, technical individual, whatever it is. But that creator in me was taking the back seat. And that's where I started feeling, I remember from 2002 to 2003, 1.5 years or so, I used to kind of dread getting to that place, constant firefighting happening and not being able to really do that creative stuff which I used to do earlier, that is designing stuff, designing machines, creating machines. And I think that's where I started, thinking, okay, if I'm not really feeling like getting up from bed and going there, I think I need to be reconsidering a lot of things. And then it took about 2.5 years post that. We had a JV with an American company. For some reasons, it did not fall through, because back then, I don't think we as a country were known for any engineering skills. IT skills, etc. People were getting recognized, the Indians were getting recognized, but still not in the core technology kind of engineering kind of stuff. And so that JV kind of didn't go well. And then, fortunately, we kind of got an investor. I had roped in a partner with whom I had shared equity way back in 1997, and those two guys then bought me out in 2005, which kind of made me completely free from all that. And then there was a 1.5 years of non-compete kind of stuff. So I wasn't really doing anything at that time in that space. At which time this bug of yoga kind of bit me. Of course, I used to practice earlier. Then in that 1 year, so one could call me educated unemployed at that time. So I had sold business interests, and then I went to these various places which tackled yoga as a science beyond anything to do with religion, and that's where I really discovered that it's a very scientific. It's a very scientific text, and it's a very scientific base. I found 3 places which handle it at a very scientific level in India. One is Swami Vivekananda Kendra at Bangalore. The other one is Bihar School of Yoga in Bihar, and now part of it, one center is in Jharkhand. And the third place I found which dealt with it scientifically was Kaivalyadham at Lonavala. And so the scientific approach to the whole thing appealed, and that's where I spent 1 year, 1 month here, 2 months there, kind of thing. That 2005, 2006, and then I think that gave me a lot of space to think about what I want to do, and that's where I felt that the influence that I have, my circle of influence should be much larger than the 75, 77 employees that I had in my organization. And I think that kind of drew me towards teaching, possibly. So I started off, just as a visiting faculty, 1 or 2 days here and there. And I also wanted to take, because I hated my profs way back when I was in college. So I didn't want to become one, honestly speaking. 1 or 2 profs who really made a big impression, I'm still in touch with. Unfortunately, one of them passed away some time back. But most of it, I felt, 90% of what happened in college, whatever, at the BTech level, at the MMS level, MBA level, not very inspiring. So I dreaded to be there.
I was afraid you would take some names of props you hated then. So thankfully, no.
No, I'm not going to take that. So I took it twice a week at a time, and then I really loved doing what was happening, and possibly that bug of wanting to have a larger influence kind of got reinforced into the whole thing, and then corporate consulting, etc., happened side by side, and that's where I am now. Last 15 years I'm into it.
Fantastic. Thanks for the detailed background in terms of the kind of pivots you've done. And I'll pick on some of the things that you mentioned. Reza, Now, you've also, of course, pivoted, corporate consulting to corporate. I don't want to talk about it because it's quite common, but corporate to suddenly entrepreneur in a totally different kind of field. That pivot happened. Take us through that.
Yeah, and the way you put it, it almost gives me the appetite again to pivot, maybe. So I should be very careful. And no, for me, it was really purpose-driven, and I think every single story is exclusive to that person, and every single story is unique in its own way, and I think can be enriching for some people and not for others. So what I'm gonna say or share about my story might not necessarily apply to some people in multinationals or corporations, and it might perfectly apply to others. In my case, it was really more because it had to do more, I think, with my intrinsic personality and the way I was. I joined Nissan for certain reasons. That's where maybe sounds a bit old school, but they were very vision driven and value driven. So I very much believed and wished to fulfill that vision statement of Nissan, which was enriching people's lives. And when I realized that, yes, maybe I was doing it in certain ways, but not in the most tangible, measurable, concrete way that I wished I would do it, I started thinking that maybe I need to look for a new way, a new platform through which I can actually enrich people's lives. So when I decided to resign,
so continuing with the Nissan terminology, instead of pivot, you shift.
Yeah, so exactly. Actually, there's a lot of consistency, I would say, and commonality. There's a lot of common denominator between what I do today as an entrepreneur in a Pilates studio like this one, and what I was doing as a head of strategy for a multinational. And those are value related because they can be in the context of a multinational or in a small enterprise or SME like what we have now. So for me, I just wanted to have an impact. I wanted to help more people, but not in a very conceptual, far-fetched way, but rather in a very tangible way, something I could literally measure every day. Like I wanted to sleep at night, put my head on the pillow and say, okay, today X number of people probably feel better because of what me and my team are doing. So the main driver for me was that. And obviously then the choice was, which industry do I want to venture to? I knew for many years that I was interested in wellness. Within wellness, it's a very wide world. There's so many things to do. I had identified things. So obviously, having been a consultant for some time and having learned from the best people and having had some bosses who taught me a few good things, yes, indeed, and some others who I believe are listening to this, who we cannot see them, but they're listening to this probably. So obviously, I try to use that knowledge. I try to use those experiences gained, and I narrowed down to specifically to Pilates and yoga. And I decided that I wouldn't do a million different things. We're not going to open a big gym. We're going to open something. We're going to use a particular specialty, but we're not going to do it well. We're going to do it phenomenally well. We're going to do it as best as we can. We're going to try to be world class. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of risk taking. So I could relate very much to some of the diagrams your colleague was showing out of the book in terms of, stretching yourself, in terms of taking risks, being risk averse, or being, liking risks, and very relevant discussion. So for me, that was it. It was just trying to find a tangible way to help you.
Absolutely. Just continuing with you, Reza, of this career shifts or career moves or career pivots, in your view, what were the, if I can use the word, the enabling factors, and what were the sort of things that were saying, no, don't take this decision now, it's too early? What were the disabling factors? Anything that you can recall?
Yeah, I think there's no one set. Yeah, there's no one set formula, I guess, but it's for each individual. Sujaya was very nicely mentioning about an instance where at some point something wasn't the right time, so she didn't do it at that time. It was only 2 years later where certain other parameters, factors changed within the environment. For me, it was a bit of that. The first time I pivoted from actually working with you guys and then moving into maybe towards a Nissan scenario, I was offered a job at that point. I didn't take it. I decided to first join, maybe spend a couple more years with the family business and learning some more and trying to use some of the skills I had newly acquired. And then when 2 years later, it was the right time. And I felt in my heart that this is the time for me where I can have a bigger impact by joining a multinational structure and learning again from that structure and contribute to that mission. Then I joined them. But as soon as I saw that wasn't the time. Now, for some people that happens after 2-3 years, some people it happens after 11 years. I believe your colleague who introduced the book is now taking his decision by tonight. So you know, it depends. For me, it was purely things came together. I had my personal family history. I had my experiences, skill sets acquired through the different things. And it was there also the fact that, you know, I was 34, 35. I was, I think, mature enough, at the same time, not too old, not too young to make certain mistakes. For me, it felt right. I have to say there was no magic formula. It was a very intuitive feeling inside, but it was very deeply rooted. That created the confidence for me to take the risk.
So you have to wait for that magic moment so that clicks in your mind saying that this is the time.
Yes, it is, but it happens because of a combination of factors, and many elements were touched upon in the book. Having the right coaches, having the right inspiration sources, reading the right books, etc. For me, I'll be honest, there were literally 1 or 2 books that made me resign from the job and literally say, okay, that's it. I'm gonna now do it because I feel inspired. Now, that book could have been written by this author or that author or another. There are plenty of self-help books and leadership and inspirational books. They are all very good, but really, if you squeeze them all, the core message that comes out of most of them is pretty similar. So for me, it came at that point in time. I felt I'm ready. There are going to be challenges, but this is the time for it.
Absolutely. Great. Lovely. Sujaya, coming back to you, like you mentioned, before you joined SR, you were a head of HR for many, many years. And a core role of any HR head or an HR professional is try and retain employees and, of course, a good talent kind of thing. Here we are talking of career pivoting and career shifts. So as an HR professional, is it at cross purpose? How, as an HR professional, do you encourage people to sort of do these career shifts, or would they sort of charge you that you're working against the company?
So I think that's a very interesting question, because when we talk to when we create initiatives like career dialogues, or when you offer to coach employees, or you offer executive coaches to employees because you want to get them to be able to essentially find their mojo, get more clarity in their thinking, in their decision making. Sometimes they're working around their EQ, or they're working around their interpersonal skills. And invariably in those conversations, they can get a moment of epiphany, which can easily lead them outside the organization. So the point is that when you're running any conversations where you're trying to get people to look at their lives in perspective and to be able to discover what their real mojo is, you're actually running the risk of being able to figure that, hey, my mojo is not to be here and to be trapped inside an organization for 10 hours in a day and then put in 4 hours to go and come back, which is one part that's hopefully gone out of the lives of many people right now. So I think it's been an ordeal for a lot of people to be able to pursue careers. It's a high level of exhaustion, especially by the time they reach very senior positions and so on. So they can get that moment of epiphany when you're having that conversation where they actually say, hey, actually, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. And I think that's why, the ethic of coaching is to be able to keep a lot of these conversations private, because people discover things which they are supposed to be discovering about themselves. So to your point on when we encourage career dialogues, or when we encourage coaching for employees within the organization, can we be at cross purposes at times? And I think we got to take a much larger perspective to this, to be able to say that actually, if an individual is seeking is perhaps has been too afraid, too scared, too insecure to be able to submit what it is that the individual is actually looking for. Essentially what what the author of Pivot is calling the plant stage, which is what is it that I'm really, really good at? What is it that I can really do with the rest of my life? And if you actually do the plant phase with a lot of sincerity and honesty, you will discover things which is beyond your job. You might actually discover that you don't actually enjoy your job as much as you think you do. You perhaps discover you're ready for something much bigger that this organization cannot offer me. So it can work like that. And I think the larger perspective on all this is that in the interest of the individual success, the organization, would rather that you're not in a suboptimal situation and still contributing to the organization or staying inside. if you've got the courage to be able to pursue what you really want to do, then maybe there are going to be some losses on that. But in the overall equation, you will not have a demotivated or a suboptimal employee.
Or disengaged employee. Fair. Yeah. Lovely, lovely. Kaustubh, coming to you, just to take on what Sujaya was just mentioning. Of course, there's going to be a balance between the employees' priorities and the organization goals, and we need to do that balancing act. And like you've commented on social media related to this program, you also mentioned that this is very scary, but you're also saying it has to be a win-win. On one hand, it is scary on to sort of maintain that balance, and yet you saying optimum or win-win. How do you sort of rationalize all these three things?
See, I think there are a few things. There is that internal urge which is making you dissatisfied at what you're doing, possibly. Maybe I don't enjoy what am I doing, or something like that keeps coming. Another thing, maybe at maybe 20 or 22, we had this great idea of doing this X, Y, Z, and maybe by 35, 36, 37, you realize at what I thought at 22, am I really doing it at 35? So those kinds of questions keep propping up. So that's and then every morning, is it really? Are you really looking forward to go out there and do something? Now, these are things which I think one needs to answer, and these are internal things. The external, so to say, parameters, I would say, is, there are people who think, well, the industry in which I'm working is going nowhere. Then maybe the boss under whom I'm working is a pain, or, those are external parameters.
But let me interrupt you here. I mean, is a normal job change a career pivot? I don't like my boss, company's not doing well, so let me change my job. Is that a career pivot or just a simple job change?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, I wouldn't say that. No.
Okay.
This is something which when you feel that your personality is different, not cut out for doing what you're doing, your values are kind of somewhere different, your creativity is somewhere not getting the right kind of channels to get expressed. That's where I think that that both Reza and Sujaya spoke about that epiphany. I think that kind of happens.
Sure.
Reza mentioned about a couple of books. For me also, I could mention a couple of books. One was The Alchemist, and the second was The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. That kind of a thing. And that kind of, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari added a little bit of a glamour to what I was doing also. So,
not because of books, right? That three of us share.
Sorry?
No, I'm just joking.
Forget the glamour bit, but then you kind of get some reinforcement that the only individual who's thinking of something like that. And at that time, there was that book had quite a following, So we used to have discussions around this and that, and kind of then it is finding the right people to have a conversation with. It happens. I think if you are constantly kind of internally burning to have that come out, have that sentiment come out, I think the universe kind of conspires to put you in touch with the right kind of folks. I really believe that happens. And fear of failure. Well, I think somewhere as human beings we have been programmed to loathe failure. I think nature around, if you see any predator who is hunting, is successful only 25% of the times. 75% of the time, that fellow, the predator is not successful. A turtle lays probably 3,000, 5,000 eggs, out of which how many hatch? Maybe 10, 20%. So the natural of success is about 20 to 25%. And we as humans somewhere feel that it should be 100%. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So there is always...
Sorry. No, I was just going to add to what Kaustubh was saying, Advait, with your permission, is that, I think that, the book And obviously, I think she's inspired perhaps by her own career and by some of the, obviously the choices she's made and the pivots she's made in her own career. I just want to add here the flip side of the reasons why you should not pivot. And I'm just trying to get to the flip side of this. I think you should not pivot because you're too scared to be able to handle larger responsibilities or to be able to lean in to do something more, which is going to take more from you, but can actually be great in the long run. You must not believe that you're pivoting because you're running away from a boss or you're running away from some unpleasant politics. And I think a lot of people make career choices for all the wrong reasons, starting with because they can't deal with the politics inside organizations. I think it's important that plant phase that she's talking about and the scan phase that she's talking about, you must spend a lot of time there so that you're not doing some escapist thing and calling it a pivot. And I think a lot of people are escaping something. And I think that there is a very nice conversation that I was part of with one of the thought leaders on high performance, where he says that oftentimes when you ask people what they want to do in a coaching situation, they're always talking about something that they want freedom from. Whereas careers are what you want freedom to, not freedom from. It's got to be a place you want to go to.
Very
I always paraphrase that you should not get out of a career, you should get into a career. Getting out should not be like you said. Absolutely. But then Sujaya, just continuing on what you said, moment of epiphany, waiting for the right moment, internal external factors like Kaustubh said, all that is fine. But how do you prepare when that moment comes? Do you need to prepare before, or you need to start those plant and pilot and scan after that moment arrives, or you should be ready for that moment?
So I think that
if you're being ready for that moment, what happens to your current career? Are you defocusing from your current career?
And I'm just saying, I'm going to say a couple of things here, that ready for that moment requires a lot of discipline, lot of grit, determination, and a growth mindset to be able to say that you're not going to look good for some time while you're trying to do this. And you need to have the courage to not look very good when you're pivoting. And I think to Kaustubh's point, and I must say I've always found Kaustubh and I very, very like-minded on many things. So I'm not surprised we're saying almost the same things. Is that he's talking about failure, and I'm big fan of how little we talk about failure, or how little our society is success obsessed. And I think we have not somewhere not been able to create the sense of realism, which is not the same as pessimism. And I'm just saying realism is really the ability to not have the lens of optimism or pessimism and to see things the way they really are. And I think that because as of from our ethos perspective, we're a face-saving society. We hesitate to give feedback. We don't want to receive feedback. All organizations struggle with this. We don't have the muscle for feedback. Now with remote working, it's become even more difficult to give and receive feedback. And as I said, as a result of that, for growing professionals, they do not have a real sense of perspective about themselves, because even their parents have not given them feedback. Their wives don't give them feedback. The husbands are not giving feedback. The children, I think they're the only ones who don't hesitate to be able to give feedback. So maybe that's a group we must listen a little more to. But I think we don't as a society give feedback. We're too worried about how the person will be hurt, will be disgruntled, will be resentful. And as a result, that whole space of plant and scan is very significantly impacted because we don't know our real strengths. And I've coached very, very senior managers who still don't know what it is that they're really all about, and you're still discovering that. And meanwhile, feeling very highly exhausted with day in and day out doing things which may not be coming from a space of strength. So I think that, to your point on how do you know once you're there, what should you start doing? And I'm saying that the planning and working hard and developing a strong growth mindset to how it is that you're developing your, and you will take a while to get there. And there will be, I have to say this, that there is something that the universe extracts from you. And that oftentimes that is not having a large salary package at the end of the month. So are you willing to put many things on the line to be able to pursue what it is in the short run you may need to give up? And I promise you it's in the short run. but with the short run, you're willing. I see a lot of people not wanting to make that short run sacrifice. And because of this, they don't actualize many aspects to themselves. And I'm saying if you go with a growth mindset, for some time you're not going to look great, but you're great and your greatness is round the corner. And so once you're on the track and you're preparing, it will come to you. But for some time, you've got to be ready to not look so great.
Yeah. I mean, these are challenges when you move from a secure job to some your own, definitely. Reza,
and I think for a lot of people, Advait, that's the biggest challenge, when you're actually going in from a secure job and from a successful career, from so many resources and power at your hand, to something where you're going to start from ground zero and you're willingly doing it yourself, to yourself. And I think I'm going to add to the list of books that Kaustubh just mentioned, and Reza has mentioned also about being inspired by books. And I think the one that I would recommend to people who want to be able to pivot is read What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20.
Okay. Yeah. That's a matter.
I think that's a very good book. It's about entrepreneurship, and I think it's very inspiring.
Reza, coming back to you, you did mention that this pivoting of yours was obviously with a purpose, and obviously it was with some shared values you had in terms of your personal belief and what you wanted to do. Now, a couple of questions there for you. One is, does a pivoting necessarily have to be so thoughtful and well planned, or can it be take it as you go, or a wild card, or that kind of thing? That is one. And just to sort of take on to Sujaya's point that he mentioned, that she mentioned, of course, in terms of the support, family support, or ask questions, can get feedback. When you did these pivoting kind of moves, what kind of ecosystem, if I sort of use a larger word, not just what kind of ecosystem support stroke reactions you got, and what should you be mentally prepared for as an advice to others?
Very good questions. The first one about the need for planning, how much planning, and then how much of courage to go with some risks. I would say definitely, of course, plan as much as you can, plan meticulously, study your subject, take the time. So again, I just share my personal experience. When I resigned from the multinational, from Nissan, I took literally a year before I actually started Real Pilates. During that year, I went through all the necessary phases in terms of what I wanted to do, which brand, which location, which size, which methodology internationally I want to associate myself with, because there were many choices, etc., etc. During that year, I read most of these books, including the Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, which was to use a word which is topical, it was a pivotal book for me. So I would say, look, it's very, very important to plan meticulously, to budget for it, to think about branding, to think about location, to think about all these things that we learn, whether it's in a business school or in a previous job or from mentors or from consultants. But the one thing that I want to focus on in answering your question is, do not wait for perfection. Do not wait for an absolutely impeccable, perfect, risk-free plan. I don't think that exists, and there's a huge risk that will translate into procrastination and just delaying something that you are dreaming of, something you're aspiring to do. So if you feel that you are about to do that, I would say, from my personal perspective, but also relying on what some thought leaders say. So the guy who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari is Robin Sharma. I loved so much the book that I actually signed up for a private program with him, and I flew to Toronto to meet him and spend the weekend being coached by him with a small group of fellow entrepreneurs. And literally on day 2 of the workshop that we had, the sessions, the coaching that we had, he was exactly saying that. It's like, at some point you need to start. There will be mistakes, there will be errors. You can fix them as you go, depending on the methodologies or processes used. I'm a strong believer of Kaizen, Japanese concept of continuous improvement. So that you can apply everywhere. It doesn't have to be in manufacturing in Japan. It can be in your personal life. It can be in your professional life. It can be in your friendships. It can be in anything. So you can start and then improve as you go. Continuous small incremental improvements day after day, and things will get better. So were we perfect on day 1? Of course not. But should I have waited another year with a better plan? Definitely not. I would have lost a year, I guess. And many of my friends around me who saw my story and who wanted to open their own businesses in different fields, many of them waited too long or still are waiting or still are hesitant because they want to nail it. They want to keep the perfect plan on paper and then jump. Well, it doesn't work that. So I would say that. And the second part of your question about the support system, I was blessed because obviously I was surrounded with a family that was supportive of my desire, not necessarily believing in the specific choice of the industry or how I do it or where I do it. There were some discussions around that, so we're not going to get into details, but it's extremely important to have that. But I will say one thing, because there's one thing is the need for a support system and family. In my case, my wife was the co-founder of the company, my personal family who supported me. But really, it's mostly in the eyes of the others, the people around you, your ex-colleagues, your friends, your environment. People might criticize, some people might mock, some people might find it senseless to do something like this, especially if you're leaving a very well-paid job or a very secure job with high potential, etc. We were mentioning high potential programs and things like that. You know, I had that opportunity, but I would say in response, don't worry about them. Actually, don't think about them, because if you're you deeply believe that what you're doing is right, you're doing it for the good reasons, and you're trying to do it as smartly as possible, coming back to planning and etc., then you just have to wait for the results to speak for themselves. There can only be two results. You either succeed, and then everyone will understand that they were wrong, and you know they will become supportive, or you will learn. And then again, if you share that learning and you explain to them what you've learned, then you know it's fine. You're not necessarily gonna fail as in collapse. You're just gonna maybe have one or two defeats, but you will learn from them and have other victories.
Absolutely. So learning from your mistakes is obviously important, and not making the same mistakes is as important. So yeah, okay, absolutely. Great. Kaustubh, just to take on the last part of what Reza mentioned in terms of failures and learning from failures. When without getting into your own specific thing, from an advice perspective as a coach, as a consultant, should there be a plan B, any kind of soft cushion to take care of a hard landing when people are thinking of career pivots?
Yeah, I think it becomes natural, right? When you're thinking about it, you kind of are, many times what happens is you are completely focused on what you want to do, and you're not thinking about something else. That's one way. But when you are talking to people, people who matter, not any Tom, Dick, and Harry, people who matter, your family or somebody whom you trust, some mentor, somebody who you go to, they are going to kind of find some loopholes in what you're doing, and subconsciously somewhere a backup kind of thought keeps getting created. You may not do it very consciously, but it kind of gets created somewhere. That's what I believe, and that's what happened with me. That's what happened with me. And maybe I didn't have.
Can that plan be going back to what you were doing anyway?
Well, I don't think that doesn't happen, because you consciously come out of doing all that, and you're conscious. It's a growth mindset, right? It's not about doing just for a career progression. A pivot is which goes way beyond a thought that stems out of career progression.
The reason I'll come back to you, Reza. The reason I'm asking is, thanks to, unfortunately, these current situations, in one of my coaching conversations with my coachee, the person who was asked to sort of resign, the person is not in a job for last 7 months now, and that person is thinking that, should I start something on my own? Should I start looking for a job? And I said, you can't try and do both at the same point in time. You have to decide rightly or wrongly, one way or the other, and therefore you can't have plan A and plan B that are purpose. You can't be on your own and then still look for a job. That's why I asked you whether that plan B can be going back to a job or something.
It has to be in line with what you're doing. When you're trying something new, there are going to be defeats, as Reza said. There are going to be, nothing is going to work as as it was planned, because when the rubber hits the road, so many other things come up. But when you're geared towards it, you have automatically kind of thought of some options, because entrepreneurs, you're constantly at crossroads. You're taking decisions. choices, right? You're choosing one crossroad over the other, one road over the other. So there are always these decision points, and when you are constantly keeping on thinking about that, growing into something else, not running away from somewhere.
Absolutely.
That
Reza, sorry, you think something?
Automatically that options mindset automatically comes in.
Yeah.
So the only thing I wanted to add quickly was if we're talking of a pivot in the sense of a major shift, of a real shift around an axis, and we're trying to do something new, going into a new direction, I would not recommend to have a plan B. I don't mean blind and just take a risk, and if it fails and you're gone. No, you can always have maybe the safety. For example, in my case, had the business venture failed after several months or a year, I would have sent my CV back to you in the hope that you would rehire me as a consultant. So I can always apply for a job. But what I'm saying here is don't have a plan B, because having a plan B, you're almost attracting it to yourself. You're almost setting yourself for possibly failing. Whereas if you have your main plan, and if we're talking of a pivot sense, I'm not talking of career advancement, linear career progression. If that's the case, yes, of course, you can have a plan B. I'm going to apply for company A. I'm going to go to Google. If it doesn't work, I'll go to Facebook. If it doesn't go, I'll go to a smaller company. But if you're talking of a pivot, don't have one. If you really believe and you're motivated with the right reasons, you should focus on your main project.
Sure. As we're sort of end of the time, so one last question to you, Sujaya. Should people start thinking of pivoting only, or let me ask you the other way, is when I'm at the best of my career, and like Reza mentioned that when he was working with the son, actually he was a high pot identified and he was really going great guns, and then he decided to quit. Is that the right way, like you said, epiphany point kind of things that, they always talk of sports people that, they should retire when they're at the peak, not when people are waiting for them to retire. This is not retirement, but
Sujaya is going to make me feel regret my decision. Sujaya, don't make me regret.
Unmute myself. I think what is important is to be able to, when you're at the peak of your career, or even Reza was at the peak of his career, and should we wait for that epiphanous moment? What if it comes when you're actually very super successful? And I want to be able to ask a very, very significant question in the middle of careers, which everyone needs to ask themselves, that your significant, or your success is significant in whose esteem? Is it in the esteem of everybody else, or is it the way you see yourself as successful? Because I'm seeing everyone's got their own paradigm of success, and you may seem superbly successful in the perspective of the others, and feel deeply exhausted and grievous and sad and unloved, uncared for, because you're not pursuing what it is that you really want to do. So I think self-renewal, in terms of being able to do and pursue, have the courage to pursue what you really want to pursue. Oftentimes that courage comes when you've already ticked the boxes of success in the esteem of others. And I think it's time to pursue, true success in your own esteem. And therefore, I'm saying that success, you may seem and I'm going to say this for Reza as well, that I think that, even if you have a job with a major multinational company, you're right at the top of your game, you yourself driving around in great cars, having a great apartment, having clubhouses, and I don't know, access to clubs and foreign holidays and children study abroad.
All that.
But you may still not be doing what's going to make you truly feel fulfilled. And I think he has the courage, which is what I'm hoping is the reason why he's here talking to everyone, is to be able to inspire other people to be able to make the choice of freedom to what you really want to do. And I think that is when you have a career that makes that's your mojo moment, because you're good at something, other people think you're good at it as well, and you pursued it out of choice, not out of compulsion of being the breadwinner, or because compulsion of looking good in the esteem of your classmates, or in terms of your friends or your in-laws. I mean, people have many considerations for why it is that they should look successful. And I'm saying that this pivot is often for people, particularly in our society. And I must mention this here, that I think that even while this book is written with all good intention, I think they're in a far more developed society where things are far more predictable as compared to our society, which is seeing affordability for the first time. People have not for a very long time believed they even have a choice in the matter. And that's part of the reason why we've given away the reins of our careers to other people. We come from a space of scarcity. We're a poor country. We're seeing affordability and all of this for the first time. But I think it's time now, the young, and I think it's very inspiring for younger generations to see. I found a lot of people who I met through my journey when I left the job and I started my own consulting firm, to see how cool to see a 50-year-old have a startup. Oh, this is so cool, to see a 50-year-old have a startup. And I thought that was just, very interesting, because even when we dealt with startups, we would always be talking to 20-year-olds. And I think it felt very refreshing, very inspiring to be able to do many things which you couldn't do, perhaps trapped in a very senior job where you felt really powerful and successful because you ticked the boxes for others. And I think Pivot is about ticking the boxes for yourself.
Yeah, great, lovely. I mean, we could go on so many more questions to. We need to abide by the time. So thanks, Sujaya, thanks, Reza, and thanks, Kaustubh. Unfortunately, we couldn't see you, Kaustubh, but we definitely could hear you. Thanks for sharing your wonderful thoughts, and thanks for sparing your time. Anand, if you're in, would like to get in here.
Sure, Kaustubh. So Kaustubh, Dio, and Sujaya, Eklavya, as always, Reza, such an interesting and inspiring thing to go through last 1.5 hours on behalf of NHRDN and the Between the Line team. Thank you very much. I'm sure all of our audience has got the necessary insights for their next pivot, which they have been contemplating about. And I'm hopeful that when we connect back with some of the participants from today's session, maybe let's say 3 months, 6 months, 1 year down the line, they will have their own stories to share with us. So with that, I'm good to sign off.
Thank you, Anand. Before we sort of this thing, one final thank you to all the panelists, and just a small announcement. Our next pivot or next program rather is scheduled on 20th of November, and we are pivoting from pivot to something that bothers us very, very clearly, is the geopolitics of Indo-US relationships, given what's happening in the US currently and the 3rd November elections. So we have again a wonderful panel, wonderful book, and wonderful topic. Sujaya, I know you mentioned that we are a poor country. Thank God you didn't say we are a filthy country, because we've heard that in the morning. Thanks once again, and look forward to seeing all of you again on 20th November. And we will of course be on social media announcing the program. So thanks, Reza, thanks, Sujaya, and thanks, Kaustubh, once again. Thanks, Anand. Thanks,
bye.
And
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.